Hey guys, welcome to Rev. So my name's Gabriella and I'm one of the youth leaders here. And I just want to ask you straightforward, do you guys trust God? Do you love Him? Or better yet, what does loving God look like? So in a very well-known scripture that speaks about love, 1 Corinthians 13, we see how it is explained to us what love is. So let's have a look. 1 Corinthians 13, from verse 4 to 7, it says, "Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." So if we were to think on what it would mean to love God and looking at the scripture, I think so many times we could have already adapted it to say, God is kind, God is love, God is patient. But let's turn it around and let's see what it would mean for us to love God. So it would mean that we would need to be patient with God and kind, that we would not want something that wasn't meant for us, and not desire our own way. It would mean to not get frustrated with Him and not wanting results that aren't true or good. But most importantly, it would mean to never give up on Him, to never lose faith in Him and His perfect way, to always hope in Him and to always persevere through every single circumstance. So right now I'm going through a really tough season in my life where I feel that, or I know that God has a promise and a blessing for me, but it hasn't come into being yet. And I just need to endure, and I need to go through this hardship and trust that He is going to give me that blessing and that I'm going to receive it. Have you guys ever been in that situation? Have you ever been in a place where you feel that God has spoken a promise over your life, but yet you're just in this waiting room, nothing is coming through? So there is a situation that completely aligns with this, a story in the Bible, which is Abraham and Sarah. And so you see from Genesis 15, we see that God promises Abraham a son, and this incredible generation of descendants to come from him. And so let's stop here. So I think we can all relate to Abraham right now. God has, like I said, given you a promise, given you a blessing, or maybe it could be something like you waiting on an answered prayer, or you waiting on breakthrough in a certain sin, maybe healing, protection. Maybe you're just trusting God for something. So let's carry on with the story. And so with this amazing promise that was given to Abraham, what do you think that he did? Well, it says that in scripture that he went and him and Sarah didn't actually trust in the miraculous promise that God had in store for them. And so instead of that, Sarah decided to give her servant over to Abraham to marry and to bear a child, Hagar. And she did. So they got married and they had a child, and this child is called Ishmael. And so we see here that Abraham and Sarah didn't trust God's promise. They didn't trust and they didn't wait on God, and they took matters into their own hands and they decided to take control. And have you ever been in that situation where you're not seeing results, and so you decide to take matters into your own hands? You decide to make the efforts. You make an effort to see the results coming through, even though it's done in your time and it's done in your understanding. So now we see that Abraham messed up, right? And what do you think that God did in that situation? Do you think that He retracted His promise and He said, you know what, you've taken matters into your own hands, you haven't trusted me, and so therefore I'm not going to give you a child of your own? Not at all. We see that God approaches Abraham. He reaffirms his identity. He tells him who he is, and he reaffirms him of the promise that he made to him. And in chapter 17 it says, "I will bless her," speaking of Sarah, "and moreover I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of people shall come from her." Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, "Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old?" Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" And Abraham said to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." So we already see that Abraham is doubting and so almost trying to make sense of what God's promise is and saying, okay, well, the son that I already have, Ishmael, who was born through Hagar, he's going to be mighty. And God says, "No, but Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year." So even when God reminds him of his promise, reminds Abraham of the mightiness and the incredible plan he has for him, Abraham doubts. And guess what? In Genesis 18, verse 12, it says that Sarah laughed too, and Sarah doubted just like him. Guys, how many times do we continuously doubt God's faithfulness? Do we continuously decide to take matters into our own hands and distrust him? That we try to make God's promises and God's plans come out in our own understanding, in our own ways, in our own time, instead of waiting on him. How many times do we stop persevering because the journey is just getting too hard to handle? So almost, we don't know how many years, but there was a time between when God first gave his promise and when Ishmael was born. But we do know that between Ishmael and Isaac, there's about 13 to 14 years difference there. So that's a long time that this promise, that it took this promise to come through. This was not an easy journey for Abraham. And I'm sure that there are many things that you're going through that are not easy journeys. But we see in chapter 21 that God is faithful and that God bears a son to Sarah at the age of 90, while Abraham is 100 years old and Isaac is born. Again, God will always be faithful even when we are not. God will always keep his promises. And guess what? Maybe that promise is going to take so many years like Abraham's. Maybe it's going to require loss and persecution and destruction and endurance. But God always will keep his promises. All we need to do is love him, obey him, and trust him. And I wish I could stand here today and say that after almost a year of waiting, this promise has been amazingly fulfilled and I have come through this time of perseverance victorious. But the reality is no, I'm still waiting on God. I'm still believing that he's good. I'm still trusting him for that victorious moment where I can walk into the blessing that he has for me. And I will continue to do that because I know he's good. And I know that if I follow his timing and I follow his plan, it is going to be beyond my understanding. It is going to be amazing. But if I take matters into my own hands and I doubt God, then there is going to be sorrow added to my journey that is unnecessary, just like Ishmael was a journey that was unnecessary to be added to Abraham's story. So in conclusion, how do we look at all of this? What do we do beyond this? We decide and we choose to be patient with God. We choose to be kind to him. We choose to not want something that was never meant for us or choose our own way. We choose to not get frustrated at him and to not want results that were never ours to have, results that are untrue and that are not good for us. We choose to never give up, to always trust him, always believe in him, and always persevere in every single circumstance.